We're live.
Yeah, can you
Okay.
believe it? We're
No.
here today on Comic Spot interview number 1109. Sorry, Andy, you were not my first.
Oh, that's okay. It's an honor to be here.
I'm 73. Nobody's going to be my first. But
Uh,
anyway, back to the show.
that's what she said. And actually she did say it. Okay.
We are here today with Andy Marx. And Andy Marx, if you don't know him yet, you're going to get to know him here and you're going to figure out he is accomplished in his own right. Let me go through a quick snippet of the amazing 4 pages of his intro on his website. I'm going to read just a little bit before I bring him on to talk. Andy Marx is an award winning photographer. Do you know how hard that is to get an award winning photographer in Hollywood? Give me a break.
Oh,
He's a writer and a musician as well, whose work has appeared in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, Variety magazine. Wake up, young people. Variety was a big deal.
it still
Hollywood,
is. Variety still is. Although it's mostly,
yeah,
sorry to interrupt you, but
no,
it's mostly online now, but it still is a big deal.
fabulous. Thanks for correcting me. The Hollywood Reporter, the Rap, Billboard, oh my gosh, LA Weekly, Forbes, the Wall Street Journal, Entertainment Weekly. This list goes on and on and on. Even Cigar Aficionado. He's also had his exhibits of photography exhibited around the world, including Europe and Israel, US, Europe, and Israel. And his first novel was in 2018 called The Royalties. And that talked a lot about his paternal grandfather, the one and only Groucho Marx. So Andy's related to the Marx brothers. There were 5 of them, not just Groucho. And and he's here to talk about his life, his legacy, his grandfather on his father's side, and his grandfather on his mother's side. And we'll get into that later. And for right now, the patient Andy Marx is sitting there all wired up, ready to talk, piano at hand. Let's get to know him right now, right here on Comic Spot. Oh,
Even a
the
ukulele on, even a
ukulele.
ukulele on,
Oh, we're going to hear a song.
just
I
in
hope it's the
case.
ukulele lady. Anyway,
Oh, yes, could be.
welcome to the stage, Andy Marks.
Well, thank you.
Yay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi,
So is
Andy.
it, so is there a Zoom link to watch this right now?
Right now, it's live on my YouTube. And
Right.
when I get off of the Zoom, it'll finish uploading to YouTube. And then I will share it with you, and you'll have a link so that you can have a copy to
Okay.
share.
All right. I wasn't sure if like right now people could watch. Are people watching it though live right now?
Well, I don't like to multitask, mostly because I have a brain injury and it's no fun for other people. But
Okay.
but you can go
Whatever.
to my YouTube right now, and I can't go to Facebook and YouTube at the same time.
I got
But
it.
I've announced a number of times it's on YouTube Live first.
Okay. We'll figure
And
it out. I'll get to it. That's fine. Wonderful. Wonderful to be here.
I can go to my YouTube right this second and see if anybody's watching.
And thank you for
That's
that
not
nice.
not a bad idea, Andy. We're live.
Wonderful to be
And if I do that, we're going to get right this second, see if anybody's watching. I don't see any chat. But if I keep it on YouTube,
here.
we're going to have reverberation.
Okay. All right. Great.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. I'm so glad you took time to come on the Comic Spot and get to talk about both your grandfathers, your early life. Let's start off by talking about Andy Marks.
Okay.
You.
I'm always ready to talk about myself.
I can't wait. You know what? I was thinking about this interview, and even though you have such royalty blood in your history, in your family, I want to know you. I want people to get to know you first. So I want to know when you were growing up, what were you like around your family and all of your family? What was paint us a picture of your early childhood from your point of view.
Oh gosh. Well, I guess I was probably, the funny kid, and I was, I got into a lot of trouble, misbehaving. I have an older brother. He's 4 years older, and he was a little more straight-laced and everything. And I think I was always the one. If basically you just watch a Leave It to Beaver episode, the kind of trouble he got into, I did a lot of the same things.
I love that.
So that was that, and I don't know. I mean, it was kind of I mean, it was in one way, it was a very normal childhood because you have to remember that in the 50s and the 60s, my grandfather Groucho was retired. I mean, he did the quiz show in the 50s, but then by the 60s, he was retired. And basically the movies had not come back, and there wasn't the whole, idol thing of Groucho Marx. That didn't occur until the 70s. So and again, the movies were not shown. So he was best known as the host of You Bet Your Life, which was a hit show, but that would be sort of equivalent to, Bob Barker, who was a long time, who was incredible, but he was basically known for being the host of The Price is Right. And obviously there were people, that knew, that Groucho and the Marx Brothers, but it was, again, at that point, you got to remember, by the late 30s, they hadn't really made, Groucho made a few movies, not very good ones in the 50s. So, you'd walk, what it was. So until that thing sort of hit in the early 70s, I didn't really have any awareness of, the sort of, that he was one of the icons of the 20th century. And the same thing can kind of be said of my other grandfather, Gus Kahn, who, is now considered, one of the legendary lyricists to come out of Tin Pan Alley. I mean, he's up there with Ira Gershwin and Cole Porter and Berlin and all of those people. He was incredible. He has he wrote It Had to Be You, Making Whoopee, Dream a Little Dream of Me, and like 25 other standards. But again, when I was growing up, there wasn't that whole kind of, the whole thing with the American Songbook and everything. That, again, that did not take place till I was much older. So, yeah, I knew that my grandfather wrote some songs. And then by the 60s, all of the kind of the adult, music that was kind of pushed aside because of the Beatles and everybody else that came along in the 60s. So again, it was not until I would say, when CDs, when CDs were introduced, which I guess that was like the early 90s. And I started, buying CDs, and I loved, Sinatra, so every Sinatra album I'd buy, almost every CD would have a Gus Kahn, and I'd go, oh, here's an Ella Fitzgerald. And then you kind of realized the scope of it. So it was much kind of later on. When I worked at Variety, I used to do a humor column. It was called Trademarks, Trade, M-A-R-X. Get it? We thought we were really clever. And I used to do this humor column, and I would go to different places and I would sort of report on them, and, write some funny stuff. And one of the things I did was, and I think this was maybe 92 or 93, Tony Bennett was appearing at the Virgin Records. He had a new album, and I think it was called Perfectly Frank, and it was a tribute. It was a CD tribute to Frank Sinatra. So I thought, and he was appearing at Virgin Records. So I thought, I'll go down there. Maybe I can get a funny story. Well, as it turned out, I did get a good story because he was like 3 hours late. And so I sort of went around interviewing the people who had come to see him, and they were waiting, and this whole thing. And at the end of the thing, I talked to Tony Bennett for a minute, and I interviewed him, and I said, oh, I work at Variety and I'm doing this thing. And it never occurred to me to say to Tony Bennett, my grandfather was Gus Kahn, who wrote a song that you've said is one of the greatest songs ever. It Had to Be You. And I could kick myself for not even thinking and that's kind of how far off sort of the map the awareness of Gus Kahn was to me, even at that time, which is kind of crazy.
Yes.
And now, now I do this Gus Kahn show called It Had to Be Gus, where I do stories and songs and everything. And so, obviously now I've studied, uh, the songs of my grandfather. I've done a couple of specials on Sirius XM, on Seriously Sinatra. And when you start really taking a deep dive, into the lyrics and how they came about and everything, it's kind of, his stuff, he dropped out. He didn't even finish high school. When he came to this country and he was like 5 years old, he didn't speak a word of English. He grew up in a house with no books, basically, and no music. And how he became one of the greatest, lyric writers ever is kind of crazy. Anyway, I think I probably veered way off the
No,
question. But
you
anyway, that
can't.
so that
I
was sort of
have
my
a
growing
brain
up.
injury. You cannot veer off from me.
Well, anyway, so my point is, it was, now we say, oh, it's Hollywood royalty, which is why I titled my book Royalties, because it was about, I mean, it's a novel about Gus Kahn and Groucho Marx, with made up people, but based on them. And so the title has a double meaning, that it's a royal family, and royalties is income that you get from songwriting. So I didn't, so again, my father was, Groucho's son. My father, Arthur, was a, very sort of, he was a TV writer, and that was back in the day. It wasn't like now, where if you have a hit, you can make, gazillions of dollars. He was sort of it was a very, he didn't have money from Groucho. He was his own guy. He was, he was a successful writer, but I mean, it was a very sort of middle class, existence. It was not, I imagine somebody like Carrie Fisher, having, Debbie Reynolds, and I imagine, and she grew up in Beverly Hills, and this is not a knock on her. I'm just saying, I imagine somebody like that probably had a whole kind of different life being around those people. And again, Groucho was my grandfather, so it wasn't like I grew up with him as a father. And then my parents divorced when I was about 10. And then we really, then it was really middle class. I mean, my mother, like, had to go to work, and she was a secretary. And then she married a guy that was, he was a studio musician. So that was my stepfather. Have you ever seen the movie, the very good documentary called The Wrecking Crew?
I've heard of it.
Okay, so that's a documentary that a guy named Denny Tedesco made. His father was a very famous studio musician named Tommy Tedesco, and they were the guys who played on all the, like, every record, from the 50s, not every, but all 50s, 60s. They played on all the Beach Boys records. They played on Simon and Garfunkel, and they were known as the Wrecking Crew. And my stepfather was around in that period. He was a string player, and he actually was a string player on many of the Wrecking Crew records. But again, they were not super wealthy, these people. So that's kind of my upbringing. Although I will say, two things that I remember uh, growing up was that, like, going to bed at night, and my parents would be having a dinner party, and like Oscar Levant would be there, and I'd be trying to go to sleep, and I could hear Oscar Levant, like, in the living room playing the piano, or another guy, a guy named Bronislaw Kaper, as I called him, Uncle Bronny, and he actually wrote songs with Gus Kahn. He wrote the songs for the Marx Brothers movie A Day at the Races, including All God's Children Got Rhythm. But and he also wrote two of the most famous jazz standards of all time. One is called on Green Dolphin Street, and the other is called Invitation, both for movies. So, I'd be going to bed, and there would be Bronislaw Kaper down on the piano, playing or whatever. I mean, so that kind of stuff was pretty cool. And, getting to know, like, Oscar Levant and people like that, was kind of cool.
Have you ever met Natalie, the comedian Natalie Levant? She's related to Oscar.
Is she related? No, I don't know her. Is she a granddaughter?
I'm not positive. I'm gonna guess granddaughter because of the age differential, but
How old?
she's
How old? Like, how old is she now? Do you know roughly?
yeah, she's like I'm guessing middle 80s, and
She's
she's had
middle
some health
80s,
things going on, but she's
80s.
a
Uh,
very funny, shocking comedian, very, older, but
yeah, I guess it could have. I mean, I'm trying to think. Oscar. I don't know how I'm not sure how old Oscar died in like 74 or something or 70. No, Oscar died I think in 72. Uh and I don't think he was that old, but I don't know, could be a I mean I'm almost going to guess that it's a granddaughter, but I don't know of
me
who.
too.
And my parents were very good friends with the Levants, and I learned something recently. You know Michael Feinstein, of course. I learned something from him is that I've known Michael for many, many years because he was friends with my grandmother Grace Kahn. So he came to Los Angeles, I believe, in around 74. I think Oscar had died at that point, but he told me that it was my mother who introduced Michael Feinstein to June Levant, who was Oscar's widow, and then somehow he got that gig where he worked for Ira Gershwin, and that kind of started his whole kind of thing. Yeah, I know it's crazy.
So you growing up, which one of your grandfathers were you around the most? And
Well,
what
well,
are some great memories from both of them, from
well,
your point of
unfortunately, Gus Kahn died in 1941, so I know I
wow,
look old, but I'm not that old.
I don't
And
know it.
so I never met him, but I can pretty much figure out what he was like from the songs. There's a movie called I'll See You in My Dreams, which is the life story of Gus Kahn, which starred Doris Day playing my grandmother and Danny Thomas playing Gus Kahn. So
Wow.
and it's a terrific movie directed by Michael Curtiz, no slouch of a director. He directed Casablanca. Michael Curtiz, in my opinion, is like the greatest the greatest director, but unfortunately, I mean, not the greatest, but one of the greatest directors of all time. But he's underrated, and I think because he made so many good movies in different genres that he doesn't get typecast for making a certain. He made Casablanca. So if you just made Casablanca, you could call it a day. He made Casablanca. He made Yankee Doodle Dandy. He made I'll See You in My Dreams. I think he made Captain Blood. And he made The Comancheros, which is one of my favorite westerns. So I mean, the list is kind of endless. Anyway, so much that I kind of knew about Gus Kahn was from the movie. And then when I went and I wrote royalties, I did what limited research I could do on Gus Kahn because there's never been a book written about Gus Kahn. He appears in various things, but so obviously to write Making Whoopee, you know, to do Making Whoopee, to write the lyrics to Making Whoopee, you have to have a pretty wicked sense of humor since that's probably the funniest song about marriage ever written. And then he wrote "It Had to Be You," which many people believe is the greatest love song ever written. Johnny Mercer said it's the greatest song ever written. So that's pretty wild.
I find it really interesting what you said that you never met Gus Kahn, but after studying his lyrics and music, you got to know him based on what he wrote. You figured out what he was like.
Oh,
I
here
think,
comes here comes my wife.
hi,
Hi.
wife.
Hi, wife. Oh, I guess there was a dog locked up. Oh, there goes the dog. All right. Well,
Hi.
you're now going to be
Nice
seeing
to meet you.
19,000 people rescuing the dog. Okay. Anyway,
Yeah,
sorry about that. Okay.
that's okay.
Okay.
Getting to know your grandfather through his works, I find that fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, I mean, he must have been some kind of genius. I mean, again, when you look at those, you just, and again, he was different. He didn't. I'm not going to say he wasn't sophisticated, but he didn't write those sort of sophisticated, like the kind of stuff that like Cole Porter wrote, because Cole Porter, he went to Yale. I think he grew up very wealthy. Gus Kahn was, worked in a crockery shop, in Chicago. And so he's more of like a man of the street, but and so he's a man of the street who writes these kind of everyman lyrics that are just, unbelievable.
So that made it easy to kind of get to know him.
Yeah, I mean, again, and I mean, and again, when I see Danny Thomas, playing him, and I go, yeah, he was probably physically a little bit like that. And I mean, I've seen pictures of him. Of course, my grandmother, I knew, his widow was, of all of the people, that she was like the sort of kind of rock and the kind of only normal one growing up. And I mean, she was basically anti-Mame. He died in 1941. She lived until 1980, I believe, three, and never remarried, and basically traveled the world and went everywhere and had the most full life. And I guess she never found anybody as good as Gus Kahn.
Oh,
And
that's
so a good part of my raising is from her, thank God, because some of the other was not so great, but she was fantastic and really,
yes.
and she was one of those, determined, would not take no for an answer, just unbelievable.
Oh, that's
So so
great.
to answer your thing about Groucho, now him I totally remember because I grew up with him. I spent a lot of time with him. It was, and he and then in the later part of his life, I took, well, I not only took care of him during the last few months of his life, but when I got out of college, I did this thing where I started archiving the You Bet Your Life. There's an article about it. I may have sent it to you. And we basically saved You Bet Your Life. I pretty much was at his house for 2 years straight, every day working on this thing because he had a screening room and we would watch the stuff. So not only did I have a nice job doing this because the producer hired me to do it, uh, so I had a nice job, and basically the job was to watch these shows, archive them, and then so this was in the 70s when the rediscovery of the Marx Brothers happened. He got his Academy Award, and basically, the every day there would be some new cool person like up at the house, or a dinner or something. So I got kind of this double thing where I was there all the time and oh, somebody's coming for dinner. Jack Nicholson is coming for dinner. Oh, cool, I'll stay. Or Paul Williams is coming, or Alice Cooper is coming, or whatever. It was like this. It was such a great education, to be there at that time.
And
Yes.
that was an odd coupling of Alice Cooper with Groucho Marx. So what is it? Is it their art that brought them together? That's so
No,
interesting.
no. What I mean, there's all this stuff about that. What brought them
Oh,
together is that they both shared the same manager. It was a guy named Shep Gordon. Shep Gordon is very legendary because Mike Myers, as who we all know as Austin Powers, Mike Myers made a documentary about Shep Gordon. And Shep Gordon managed, and you know, obviously what happened was Shep probably came over one day and he brought Alice Cooper. And then Alice Cooper thought, oh, the Marx Brothers are whatever. I'm sure. I mean, so there was sort of a genuine friendship, but I don't know. I mean, again, that was already kind of in the downhill kind of part of Groucho's life. So, I don't know. I find it just, I find a lot of the stuff that gets tossed around. I don't quite, I mean, again, since I was around a lot, I don't have any, I never saw any evidence of some of this stuff. I'm sure Alice Cooper idolized Groucho Marx.
I
Okay.
haven't read anything about Alice
But
Cooper.
there's like stories about, Alice Cooper came over in the middle of the night and they drank beer together because Groucho had insomnia. I mean, I can pretty much say 99% that never happened. Okay. But
Yeah.
Alice Cooper was at the house quite often. He would come for lunch and everything. They would sort of, hang out for lack of a better word. So I'm not gonna knock Alice Cooper and say they weren't friends because they were good friends. And I've heard like Groucho went to see him at like the Hollywood Bowl or something, which I'm sure is totally true. But again, to be honest, I'm sure he was dragged there, by whoever kind of decided to take Groucho. I don't think Groucho woke up and said, "I'm going to go see Alice Cooper." And
What
again,
one?
not to disparage Alice Cooper, who
Oh,
when I met him, I thought he was great, and I've always been a huge fan of his. And again, I can say yes, he spent a lot of time at the house. Yeah.
yes.
I mean, I remember going to the Roxy one night, which is a club here, because they some for some reason they used to come to the house, or certain members of them came. Remember, the group Manhattan Transfer?
Yes.
Well, I don't know. I can't remember the guy's name. There were like two guys, and one guy was like very attractive, and the other guy was sort of a whatever, but kind of a tall. And I believe I don't really remember why, but he and then some woman, one of the female members of the group would be at the house for dinner, and I'd play piano for them, and they'd sing or whatever. And then I remember like we would go to the Roxy, but I'm not really sure. Again, at that point, we're already getting now only a couple of years, and Groucho, he started to get in bad health. He died in 77. So, that the last 2 years were a little rough, so again, and people, because well, that was seven. He turned, I remember there was an 85th birthday party uh, for Groucho, and that would have been 1975. So, and he was okay then. I can still remember, he was in, okay shape, but then it started to go, he'd be, as what happens when you get to be that age, you fall, and you break your hip, and then you're in the hospital, and you don't die because of the hip, you die because you're on your back and you're old and you get pneumonia, so he'd go into the hospital, and then he'd come out, and then he would go, and it just got, worse and worse. But, so I would say like through 75, he was pretty good. He was still pretty good, you know.
When you were growing up, your earliest recollection of Groucho and you never met Gus, but Groucho and his brothers. I have to hear what it would have been like to be related and have any kind of run in close proximity with Groucho and the Marx brothers as a young child. I
Okay, well,
know you didn't know about that you grew up not thinking that you were entitled and from royalty. That didn't hit you till much later, but just
of
having them
course,
around you.
now, of course, I think I'm entitled, and whatever. So
Yeah.
I have as much entitlement issues as anybody, but no, not really. But well, I'll tell you, I mean, I can still remember. I was very young. We were living in Pacific Palisades, and I can still remember this. And we lived on a corner lot, which and it was all lawn, and we converted it kind of into a baseball diamond, and then the outfield would be like out in the street, because we lived on this corner. So you'd be out in the outfield, until a car came, and then you'd have to run off to the side. But I do remember. I mean, I can still remember this. It was a Sunday. It was an afternoon, and my brother and I were out doing this, and my mother came out and she said, "Boys, come in. We want to show you something." And on the TV was A Night at the Opera. And I can still remember. I remember watching the stateroom scene, but I don't remember how old I was, but I'm going to guess, my parents were still married, so I had to be 6 or 7. And, thinking it was very funny. But again, those movies, you just never saw them. So that was that. And then, I'd go over to Groucho's house, and a couple of the brothers would be there. I remember we used to go, when Harpo lived in Palm Springs. I remember we used to go to Palm Springs and go and visit him, and at his place. I think he lived or in Rancho Mirage, or one of those places. And, so, or like I'd be at the house, and Zeppo and Gummo would come. Or you also have to remember that Harpo and Chico died in the 60s. They were only like in their 70s. And, I think it was like, I don't know, 64 or something. You'll have to check the date, but so they were already gone. Unless Chico was actually at the house or something, I can't really recall meeting him, although I'm sure I did. But I kind of don't really recall it. And,
Absolutely.
but I remember all the other ones, and I can remember I do remember a day when they were all at the house. But again, I would have had to been like at the oldest, maybe 10 or 11.
Were they the entertaining type around family, or were they just there showing up? Like
Well,
I That
the
used to be entertainment for family.
I know. No, they weren't. I mean, again, when I was when the this is sort of a story indicative of my grandfather Groucho. When the whole comeback rediscovery of the Marx Brothers happened, kind of, I would say maybe like around 1967. Okay, because like film schools were starting to happen and people were starting to discover old movies. And there was a record album that a lot of my friends that were Marx Brothers fanatics when they were young, even guys that I know that were younger, there was a record album that was basically, it was just an album of audio bits from Marx Brothers movies. And it was narrated. Do you remember the great radio announcer? His name was Gary Owens. He was
Remember that?
on how you might remember him was he was the guy on Laugh-In. When you cut to, there was a guy like pretending to be a radio announcer. That was Gary Owens. So anyway, so Gary Owens narrates this. He does this thing and he goes, now here's a, here's a funny clip with Chico trying to get the password, from I guess horse feathers or something. So anyway, we all bought this, and they also did one for W.C. Fields, and they probably did some other ones. Anyway, so we all memorized these bits, right? These Groucho bits. So in 1969, I was getting ready to go off to college, and I knew all the bits. And at the same time, my father and his partner, Robert Fisher, had written a show called Minnie's Boys, and they were leaving in the fall, like whenever. It was like right around the same time that I was getting ready to go to college, and they were getting ready to go to New York for like the 3 or 4 months of working on the show, and then the show would open. So somebody threw a party for my father and his partner, and my dad's, my stepmother, and Groucho was there, and I was invited. And, a big party. And I sit down next to my grandfather and I immediately start doing the bits from the albums. And he got very angry. He goes, I don't want to hear that. He goes, that's from the past. He goes, people that talk about their past get old. He goes, I don't care about any of that, blah, 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 the whole thing. Okay. So, cut to, like 1972, and now he's like the toast of the world. Of course, he loves nothing better now than talking about his past. So, but he did, he did get angry with me for doing that. But I continued doing when I went off to college, I ended up doing Groucho and doing a
That's
little. I
really
actually
very
did a little.
insightful.
I'm sorry, what?
That's very insightful of him to be guarded against getting bitter.
Yeah, but again, it's funny that he after a while he didn't resist anymore, and he loved it. He loved the adulation. So,
Do you know the You Bet Your Life was such a big part of my life. Such a big part of my life. I couldn't wait to hear what was coming out of
oh
Groucho's mouth next.
yeah, no, it was very funny. I mean, you do know, hate to burst the bubble, but you probably do know that a lot of the stuff was kind of written ahead of time. I mean, they would, there were sort of what, they called writers who basically would interview the guest and find out sort of funny things. And then they would say to Groucho, try to go here. And, maybe you can get her to talk about it. And then, and he was obviously very quick and witty. So he could do that. But he had a little bit of help, but, not to take away, because he was definitely a wit and
Whose
came up.
I was it Groucho's idea to have the bird drop from the sky?
I don't know. I mean, there was a guy named John Goodell. The show originally was on radio, so I don't know if they even did that on radio because you couldn't see it, but I guess you could say it or something. You
Yeah.
could say guess the secret word, and then you would, and you could do a thing. But I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know how that came about.
Yeah, I saw You Bet Your Life as a little, because I was born in 51 and
Right.
I was around the TV every time he'd come on. And I never forgot him, even through the years where he went through being overlooked until later on. I never forgot about Groucho, how funny he was.
Oh, I mean, he was hysterical. I mean, it was incredible. So,
Such great timing.
oh yeah. Well, I mean, think how long, I mean, he'd been doing that since the early 1900s, playing in front of live audiences and coming up with stuff and ad-libbing. It's kind of, I came to this realization the other day. I don't know if you're religious or not, but I came to a realization, like I'm a real Beatles fanatic, and I have gone way down the rabbit hole and into the weeds about the Beatles and how they happened. And I happen to think, and so because of that, and I wasn't like a huge fan when they were around, because I was kind of more into blues and soul and all that. But I've come around now, basically, to saying that there was nothing like them before, and there's been nothing like them after. Okay, and pretty much everything that came after them. I mean, obviously, I'm going to exclude hip hop and rap and all that, because that is a whole completely separate thing, which is fine, which really doesn't have much. Okay, and it's good, but it's a different thing. But basically, everything else, that came after that is some result of something that they did. They kind of invented the whole thing of, going into the studio and not just doing a bunch of stuff and being done. Like they kind of used the recording studio as a thing. They got so. But the thing is, if you go into the weeds of like how they got together, how did they end up with George Martin, who never should have been the producer, and had George Martin not been the producer, they would have just been another throwaway rock band, whatever. So, there are people that are who will say, even if you don't believe in God, you kind of have to believe in a higher power when it comes to the Beatles. When you go into, like, for example, they're. Do you mind if I'm getting off on a tangent here
I
away from?
love it. I
I'm
want to
gonna,
get to know you.
because I'm gonna
I want
get to the Marx Brothers in a second.
I'm
So
go-
the
I
the
want
way
to
that
get to know you.
okay, so the
So
way
this
that
is
they
great.
came, so George Martin, who was the brilliant producer of the Beatles, basically who people call the fifth Beatle. All right, because he was so instrumental, no pun intended, in what they did. Okay, so so when the Beatles were signed I guess to EMI, nobody knew what to do with them. Oh, it's a guitar group. I don't know. We don't know what's blah blah blah. Nobody wanted to produce them. Nobody wanted to touch them. And so George Martin, who was working as kind of a comedy record producer at EMI, he did like Peter Sellers, he did the classical stuff, really had very little pop rock experience. There was another guy there who basically got all the pop acts and everything. Okay, so it turns out that George Martin was having an affair with his assistant, his secretary, and he was married. And I guess the upper echelon people at EMI found out about this, which of course they frowned upon. And so as a punishment, they said to George Martin, "You're going to have to produce the Beatles." Okay? So that's like the greatest, maybe not since Frank Sinatra and Nelson Riddle. That's the greatest musical collaboration in my mind in the history. Okay, so anyway, there's all kinds of stuff where Paul McCartney was in the eighth grade and George Harrison was in the seventh grade, so they were always a grade ahead. But then Paul McCartney got held back. He had to repeat the eighth grade, and then George Harrison got into the eighth grade, and they met and they decided they wanted to be in a group together. Okay, I mean, there's like a million of these kind of crazy things. All right. So, like I said, even if you're not a believer in God, you got to believe in a higher power. So, I'm going to say there's only one other thing that happened in the 20th century that I will say that about, which is even if you don't believe in God, when it comes to the Marx Brothers, you have to believe in a higher power. Okay, so there was four, really five, but let's say four, and one guy was the straight man who was very good. But then you have three guys. Okay, so you have Groucho, one of the wittiest wordsmiths, whatever, and off the top of his head, ad libber, whatever. He was also an incredible dancer, as you can see in those movies. Okay, he was like multi-talented. Okay, then you have Harpo, who it's been said about is one of the great harp players of all time, kind of self-taught, All right. And Marcel Marceau told me this, that Harpo is one of the greatest mimes that ever lived. Okay. And then you have Chico, who is a comedy guy in his own right, but different than the other two, and an unbelievably great musician and piano player. So it's basically three different guys, all in the same family, who don't do anything alike. It's not like, and I know that I guess the Three Stooges, I don't know, a couple of them were related or whatever. But when you see the Three Stooges, they all kind of do the same thing. They hit each other, right? Or one guy's getting hit, the other guy hits back, and that's pretty much it. But the Marx Brothers were like three separate. Every one of them was a genius in his own thing, and they're in one family. It's a little bit like. So that's why I say that. I'm
You're
always
gonna
like,
make me cry.
another one. Look at the Gershwins. Okay, so you have one brother who is one of the might be one of the greatest composers of 20th century music, whether it be popular, classical, whatever. Right? Okay, so let's say there's two brothers. One is George Gershwin, and the other guy's Ira, and he grows up to work in a delicatessen. Okay, so you go, well, they had one son was really talented, the other one not so much. He works but it didn't turn out that way. So you have one of the greatest, again, composers of the 20th century. His brother is one of the greatest lyricists of the 20th century, and they obviously they worked together and wrote some of the greatest songs of all time. So I don't know. It's stuff like that that just kind of amazes me. But again, the Marx Brothers is even more because there's three of them that all had different talents, and each one was a genius. You can't say that about many other teams of performers.
You can't. What
Yeah.
made the Marx Brothers become so prolific in their own right? Was it great parenting? Was it just God? What was it?
Probably a little of each. I mean, again, if you're not religious, you're going to say, well, God had nothing to do with it. But I mean, it wasn't. It wasn't like, oh, Harpo went to Juilliard and learned how to play the harp. Okay. I mean, he just learned. I mean, I think he was pretty much self-taught. He may have his mother may have like make him take some lessons or something. But and again, look at Chico, like the skill. I mean, he was incredible, but like when you watch that stuff that he does, in the movies, with the fingers and the going and the thing, and it's unbelievable. And then
Yes,
again, you have Groucho Marx, one of the greatest wits of the 20th century. Uh,
bar none.
yeah, so it's just again, it's crazy.
Was Groucho the one that scripted most of their interaction on
No, no, I
stage?
mean well, you mean in vaudeville?
Yeah.
I don't really. I mean, I think they all sort of did it together. I mean, I don't know, to be honest. I would imagine. I mean, Harpo didn't talk, so so he kind of did his. There's all these different stories about why he didn't. I
So
mean,
I have a twin brother, Andy, and
oh,
my
I have
twin,
twins.
what?
I have twins.
You
I have,
do?
yeah, son. I have a boy girl set of twins, and another
Wow.
daughter, and I have an older daughter. But yes, I have twins. So you have a
Oh.
twin brother.
And he is infatuated of the memory of Harpo. He thinks Harpo was no diss to Groucho, but he's just taken a shine
Yeah, well,
to
that's
Harpo.
fine. I mean, like I said, I mean, I had lunch with Marcel Marceau at my grandfather's house, himself, one of the greatest mimes who ever lived. And he said to me, your great uncle Harpo is one of the great mimes ever. So,
And
and
I heard he's
where did
quite
he
a
learn that?
humanitarian. In real
He
life,
was.
he was like one of the kindest, nicest.
Yes, I'll tell you a story. And I actually found it when I went to Israel in 2019, and I had heard, I had heard that there were a couple of Harpo's harps at the Jerusalem Academy of Music and Dance. And I had read about it and I had heard about it. And so I went to Israel in 2019 and I was staying in Tel Aviv, but I took a day trip to Jerusalem to get bar mitzvahed. I had never been bar mitzvahed as a kid. I like to tell people, my parents gave me a choice. They said I either have to go to Hebrew school or I have to take piano lessons. And I went for the piano lessons because I figured it would be easier to get women playing the piano than speaking Hebrew. And I was right. So anyway, I never was bar mitzvahed, and so on my way to Jerusalem, I said to the tour guide, I said, "Oh, can you help me? I understand. Are we going to be going by the Jerusalem Academy of Music and Dance?" He goes, "Yes." I go, "Well, I understand that two of Harpo's harps are there." So he gets on the phone and he goes, "Yeah, they are. We're going to make a stop." So we stopped there, and I'll send you some pictures and stuff. There's a picture of me with Harpo's harp, and here's a funny story about that. Uh, Harpo had been dead, and I guess he died in the '60s. And Israel, I guess, every year has an international harp festival, and so I don't I guess they got in touch with his widow Susan, and they said, "Would you come and be a judge at this thing?" And she goes, "Well, I don't know if I want to be a judge, but would you be interested? I'd love to donate a couple of harps to Israel." And they go, "Yeah, we'd love that." So, oh, actually, she did go. So she said, I'll bring them." And so she flies to Israel and gets off the plane. And the Israeli government says, "Sorry, but you have to pay a $12,000 customs fee for bringing the instruments into Israel." And she said, "Well, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to do that, and I'm just going to turn around and take them with me." So somehow they figured it out, and she didn't have to do that. But so anyway, so I got to see the harps in Israel.
How incredible is that?
No,
How
right?
incredible.
I
Incredible.
know it was
It's
very.
so great that Israel keeps that memory alive,
I
and
know,
it's
I know,
important.
I know, I know. Yeah, it was. I mean, they were just like sitting. They were just like in somebody's room. I'm sure somebody probably probably goes there and practices on them. They may not even know who Harpo is. But anyway, that was a nice treat to see them. So that was kind of cool.
Well,
That-
getting back to you as a human
yes,
being,
yes,
you've done a one-man show for Gus,
yes, I do.
your maternal grandfather.
Yes.
Have you done a one-man show for Groucho?
No, I leave that to the other people. Do you know about Frank Ferranti?
No.
Oh, well, you look him up. His name is Frank Ferranti, and he has been doing. I originally saw him in 1985. He was a student at USC. He was doing a Groucho show, is like part of his, I don't know, thesis or whatever. I guess he was a drama major, and I guess my father had gone down. Somebody called my dad and said, "Have you seen this guy?" So he went down there. He loved him, and then my dad called me and he said, "Andy, would you go down there and tell me what you think of this guy?" And I went down there, and it was astounding how he captured Groucho. I mean, it was incredible. And so anyway, so he went into my father's show, which my father wrote with Robert Fisher, and that show is called Groucho: A Life in Review. Revue, very clever. And anyway, and that show is literally he's been performing in that show since probably 1986. He's won awards. It's been all over the world. And then he actually has his own show. I guess he kind of, because the Groucho Life in Review has other people in it, and you can't just like show up. You can't like go into a small place and do that. You need to kind of do it in a big place. So I guess he still kind of does that show. And I'm actually going down to the desert, down to Palm Desert tomorrow. I'm going to see Frank, and then on Wednesday he's doing the show in a place called La Quinta, which is down in that area, and I'm going to go see him in the show. So I have, he's on. I mean, just there's a like a PBS thing about him or doing it, or I mean, so he remember Hal Holbrook, who used to do Mark Twain.
I
Okay,
met him.
so like there was nobody tried to do Mark Twain after Hal Holbrook did it, right? And I'm going to say the same thing about Frank. He basically is the Groucho what Hal Holbrook was to Mark Twain. There's nobody else who can do Groucho like Frank Ferrante, and he does him from young to old, and it's incredible.
I've
And
got to see it.
yeah,
I'm going to make.
so that in answer to your question, that is why I don't do that. This is a musical tribute. I just got back from the Turner Classic Movies cruise where I did it. I understand it was a big hit. And
Is he
I
related to Ferrante and Teicher, the musicians
no,
from
I don't
this?
think so. And he's
Okay.
also related. It's funny because I was watching the movie An Affair to Remember. Remember the Cary Grant movie, and his character in the movie is named Nicky Ferranti, which I had completely forgotten about. Obviously, he's not related to a fictional movie character, but he is not. But he's absolutely brilliant. So anyway, I did my show on the Turner thing. I talk about Gus Kahn. I tell fun, stories. I actually do a Groucho song that Groucho wrote with Harry Ruby because we got to get a little thing in there about Groucho, and it was a big hit. It went over very well, and now I'm starting to do it in places. It's
Oh, great.
called It Had
Where,
to Be Gus.
say that again?
Called It Had to Be Gus. And again, I go through the repertoire and do the whole thing. I don't know. Based on the TCM thing, I got myself, like a booking manager. So we'll know soon where I'm going to be. So that will be fun. I am doing actually a benefit, which I think they'll love. I'm, in LA, they have what is that motion picture, the home, for it's that beautiful place for all the old Hollywood people. I'll probably end up there, but no, hope so. I mean, if you're going to have to go to one of those, anyway. But I'm going out there in a couple of weeks to entertain the folks out there, and they will love the Gus. I mean, they'll love that. So I think so. I mean, they'll love the songs, and we do a sing along, and people know the songs, and so you know
Absolutely. And the title of that is a play on words of Gus's famous song, It Had to Be You.
that is correct. You are very bright and witty. You picked up on that. I like that. Good for you.
Well, let's talk a little bit. Let's let people get to know Andy a little bit now. So you're a dad of a set of twins like me, a boy and a girl.
And
And
then so they're 24, and then my older daughter is 34.
wonderful. And what
They're
are
all
they doing with their
What
lives
are they doing
since
with
they
their
had the
lives?
best
Okay,
father ever?
my 34-year-old is does like marketing and PR and social media and all that in the world of hospitality, which means hotels and everything. She was working. There's a big Hilton in a place called Playa Vista down here where she was working for 2 years, and she actually is starting a new, better job, kind of doing the same thing. The promote, there's an Atlantic article, and the title of the article is Boomers Have No Idea What Their Children Do for a Living. So, but no, I mean, it's great. It's the social media stuff, it's the promotions, it's all that. But now she's starting at a new place called the Intercontinental, which I guess is it's the highest building like west of the Rockies or something. So she just got recruited for that, is starting that my the twins and her name is Haley. The twin daughter is named Gracie, and Gracie really, she inherited the slightly snarky Groucho sense of humor. Although my older daughter, when she was younger, she used to quote a line from A Night at the Opera, and when she was in places, she would go up to people and go, "Tell me, is it hard to sleep on your stomach with such big buttons?" So they would think that was funny. Anyway, my next daughter, Gracie, uh, kind of made a name for herself again on all the social media stuff, doing sports. Like she's totally, she sort of had it wasn't really a gambling site. You couldn't place bets, but she would give the lines and everything for the games and the whole bit. She got discovered. She was working for a place called Prize Picks, which is in Atlanta, but she was working here doing the social media and the trolling and all the stuff. They paid her a lot of money to sit in her room and watch sports 24 hours a day. Then
Oh,
she
wow.
got recruited by a better company in New York. And one of I can't remember I can't remember the name of the company, but so she moved to New York. and is now doing it there. And then my son, who is a very, really good musician, also, the two of them just graduated. So I don't know. He's kind of like sort of trying to figure out what he's doing. But in the meantime, he went to US University of San Francisco. He decided to move back to San Francisco because he met a girl who lives there, so he wanted to be with her. And we said, okay, well, you're going to have to get a job and support yourself. So he got himself a job. He's a history major. He runs the museum shop at Alcatraz in San Francisco. Yeah. And
So
he
cool.
takes the boat every day over to Alcatraz. And so that is what they're all doing. They're all employed, which is more than
That's
I
so
can say for
great.
myself.
What a great way for him to apply his knowledge.
Yeah, so it's really good. And people out, they go, "Oh, you related to Groucho?" And he goes, "Dad, all the boomers want to know if I'm related to Groucho." So yeah, so anyway, so that was they're all doing great. So I'm happy about that.
Fabulous. So you have a book, your first novel you wrote in 2018. And have you written more books
No,
for us to get out?
I have not. Sometimes like they say, it's the second one that's hard. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I've kicked around some stuff. I just don't. I've been kind of busy with like other stuff, so I don't know. It's not like on the forefront of my things to do. Because I'm still working. I still work a lot as a photographer, and that takes up a lot of time. And.
What kind of photography do you like doing?
Well, I do sort of I do two things. So I would say, the sort of job photography is like, anything, posters, headshots, all that kind of stuff that's sort of controlled in a studio, and you do that, magazine covers, all of that kind of stuff. But then I do, well, I don't do it so much anymore because of COVID, but prior to COVID, I did what they call street photography, where you just basically, you walk around, I would take a camera with me everywhere and I would shoot, cool. I loved shooting people, like when they didn't see me, doing, whatever. And I don't know now, since COVID, well, when COVID came, that was sort of the end of doing street photography because there was nobody out, and if they were out, they wore, they would be wearing a mask. So that, but between the fact that nobody was out, and then, it's been like 4 years now, and we kind of are in this world of, where everybody every second of the day is carrying a camera around, and I don't know. I mean, I know people obviously still do it. It just got kind of boring. I mean, it just sort of, but I have. So for the street photography, like I have a guy in Florida, like who has a gallery and like sells my stuff and everything. I may do a couple of books. I may do like I got kind of famous for a while doing martini photos. So I may publish a book of like my martini photos or something like that. But that's I'm a little I don't know if I don't want to throw the ADHD. I know everybody throws that around, but I'm a little bit. I kind of get into something, and then I kind of do it, and then I get kind of bored, and I go, well, I want to do, or and then I won't do that for a while, and then I'll, I don't know. We'll see.
What
There's
got
always
you
something
into
fun to do.
martini photography?
Because I used to go out every night and have a martini, and I just started taking photos of them. But again, it was so different back then because now it's like, everybody who goes into a restaurant now takes a photograph of whatever they're eating and puts it up on Instagram. It was sort of an original cool thing, and I would be like, I'd get promotion things, from like vodka companies, and they would, now again, it's just, and everybody's an influencer now. And it's just a completely different world now. So, but
Yes.
you gotta just do, whatever the world is, you do. Yeah.
Well, when you go out and perform anywhere in public, please let me know.
Oh,
I
I
do
will. I
tend,
will.
I go to Laguna a lot. My sister lives there and they have a playhouse at Laguna.
Oh, I
Maybe you
know.
could,
That would be a good. Yeah, I'm going to talk to my manager about that. And I don't know if I end up if I do a thing in Palm Desert, I'll tell you because that's not that far.
no.
from Vegas. So, that would be cool. I'd love to meet you in person. That would be
I'm
awesome.
actually an usher at the Laguna Playhouse when I'm in town, so I get to see the shows.
Oh, that's great. You're kidding. That's so great. Are you there for the art thing? Is that where they do the art?
Yeah,
The
they have a couple art walks there
No, but
yearly.
is that where they do the pageant of the masters?
Yes, right up in that area
I
across
love
the
that.
street.
Yeah, I love that. I've been to that a few times. It's kind of cool. It's really
Yeah.
good. Yeah. See there, you can see behind me is a picture. You probably can't see it, but it's a picture of Groucho.
Is that the big picture in the middle?
Yeah, the big pig. He's like sitting on a bearskin rug, and then you see him. Anyway, so well, this was so fun.
So fun. I have one question I want to ask. I would be remiss not asking it. All that Groucho has been to all of us, do you think that, if you had to guess, do you think there was anything Groucho wished he would have done?
Yes.
Really? Like what?
Well, he was one, but he was not known for this. He always said that he wished he could have just been a writer. Which is maybe why, maybe that's why my dad, and maybe me, I became a writer. I don't know. I mean, I don't think I consciously said, oh, Groucho wanted to be a writer. I'll do that. I probably gravitated towards it because of my dad. Although nobody ever did, I was an actual like newspaper, like, newspaper journalist at, big place. Like nobody in my family ever did that. So it was kind of cool to be able to do that. And I don't think anybody in my family ever made a living from photography. So, that was kind of cool. But Groucho, he published books, he has an autobiography. He wrote some kind of funny books, but he always I think he just always thought that he wished, he could have been more renowned for being a writer. He loved, he loved writers. And that's,
That's
growing up, again, before the big discovery of the Marx Brothers, he he didn't like actors at all. I mean, he used to joke about actors, but he loved writers. And you'd go to dinner at his house and you'd have some cool writers over or something. Like that's what he really loved. That's and or producers or he was very good friends with a guy named Nunnally Johnson, who was like a famous writer producer, wrote wrote and produced a lot of cool stuff. And he was like very good friends with him. And there were other people. He just, Groucho was what, I would call, a real intellect. He really was an intellectual. I mean, he was incredibly well read. I remember once, it was, he just, he read, and that was back in the days when there was some really good writing, like for instance, like Time Magazine is sort of a joke now, but like, back like in the like Time Magazine had like incredibly great writing in it. And I remember, uh, it was, what year would that have been? I don't know. I don't remember what year, George Harrison's album, his first album, the solo album called All Things Must Pass. It was probably, let me see, 69, 70. I don't know, probably maybe 71 it came out. But I remember going to Groucho's house for dinner one night, and he used to have this kind of bar area where he had a bar where he would make drinks and stuff, and then there was there were couches, and that's kind of where everybody would congregate before dinner. And I remember, and he would kind of hold court. And I remember him saying he went into this whole thing because when that George Harrison album came out, there was sort of this, George Harrison had kind of been thought of as he's sort of the other Beatle. And, he always got trampled on, by Lennon and McCartney. And he really, and he wasn't that great of a songwriter. And that's why there weren't more, there wasn't more stuff, and then this I think it was 3-disc album comes out. And all of a sudden, people are saying this is like the greatest album ever. And wow, he was like the undiscovered, Beatle and this whole thing. And I remember Groucho sitting there and he goes, I've been reading about George, and he was not into the Beatles, Groucho, but he goes, I've been reading about George Harrison, and it turns out he was actually like really, so he could have this whole conversation about George Harrison and the Beatles and this whole thing because he had read it somewhere, he'd probably read it in a lot of publications. And but it's, again, that was, how many years ago is that? Is that 40 years ago? No, more, right? 50, right? Yeah. how long ago is 1971? That's 50 years ago, right?
50 years.
Okay, so and for some reason I still remember 50 years ago, I can still remember my grandfather saying, "Oh, it turns out George Harrison was the real genius of the group," you know. And that stuck with me. Yeah. So
What do you think Groucho would think of what is going on in the world today? How mashugana things
I
are? What
don't,
would he?
it is very funny that I mean, I'm glad you brought that up because I don't really have an idea. I mean, okay, so are we talking about what would the 120, what would the 130-year-old Groucho think of today, or what would the 80-year-old, think?
How about it? What would you bet your life be like today
Oh,
with
I
the
don't, who
woke
even,
and
oh, I know. No, I don't know. Well, that's the other thing, my son Ethan, uh he took his girlfriend to like a Marx Brothers double feature in San Francisco. It's like I used to do, right? And it was playing in a theater, and he basically texted me, and he likes Marx Brothers, and he goes, Dad, I can't believe I can't believe that Harpo hasn't been canceled. And it's, I went to see Monkey Business the other day, and there's like scene after scene of Harpo, not naked, but kind of like in a nightshirt or something, like chasing women around, and women. It's like, it's kind of amazing. I don't know what it's like. I've often wondered, like, what would Groucho have thought of Trump? I don't know. I don't know. Like, what would the 80-year-old Groucho think of Trump? I mean, I know he didn't like Nixon, so yeah, I don't know. But there's also the thing, as people, my father used to be very liberal, and then he got like super conservative, and he loved Bush and all of those, all of those people. Not that there's anything wrong with them, but but I remember when I was growing up, he was very, very, he was against capital punishment. And then as you get older, you go, yeah, I like capital punishment. So I don't know. So I don't know, but that is a question. I should do a book called "What Would Groucho Have Thought of Donald Trump?"
what would Groucho do?
Yeah,
WWGD.
right. What would he do? I don't know. He probably wouldn't like Trump. I'm going to guess. I think he would. I mean, even like this, when Nixon resigned, Groucho was like 82, so he was all together, and he could think. I got to think Groucho would not be cool about them like breaking into the Capitol. I'm just going to make a guess about that.
Oh man,
I would love
indelible
to.
impression that day
I know,
was.
right? I know. I mean, I don't know. And that was the other thing about Groucho. He could be very serious. Like I say, like the George Harrison thing, he was very serious and pontificating, and he would sit around and and they would, he loved history, he loved, all of that kind of stuff. I mean, again, another guy didn't go to school, and could tell you anything, any historical facts or whatever, which I guess goes to show you that school is not worth it. I don't know.
Two things before we close,
Yes.
Andy.
Yes.
What's the legacy in a nutshell you're trying to leave? And what one thing have you not accomplished that you must accomplish?
Okay. What is the legacy I'm trying to do?
What is it that if you want people to say Andy Marx, blah, 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 what is that blah, blah that's not so blah that you want them to hang on to when you're gone?
Wait, but you talking about me? No, but then you said something about them.
No, I mean, you're leaving a legacy for other people to remember you. So if you project into the future, what do you want those people to remember you because that's your legacy?
I don't. I mean, so you're just talking about what I've accomplished?
Yeah, what one thing is it that you want? Like just one thing that is got to be inside your legacy.
Oh God. Probably that I managed to like forge a career and do stuff that like nobody else in my family did. So I think that and again that's kind of again the writing, like I'm very, very proud of my my journalism career and everything I did with that. And again, nobody did that. And again, I guess it would be that I've done stuff that nobody else in my family did, and did good work. I think that would be it.
Yes. And what's something that before you get old like me and kick the bucket,
Same age
what's
as you. I'm not. You and I are the same age. All right, go ahead.
what's the
I
one?
just have the heavy, the heavy touch up on Zoom, so I only look 40. But trust me, you and I would be swiping on the dating sites. I mean,
Let's do it.
not swiping, but we'd be going, yeah, I'll pick her. Okay, anyway, go ahead. Okay, run that by me one more time.
What's the one thing that you haven't done that you have to do?
Oh, I would like to do my music in front of a lot of like the Gus Kahn thing. I would actually like to do that in front of like in a big arena and do that and really blast that off the ground because that's something I came to this sort of later in my this is I've been doing all the other stuff. I was living in Hawaii for a while, but I'd always been playing the ukulele, but I got very much into it there, and at the same time discovering all the Gus Kahn and doing all that. And it was in 2019, and then I came back here and I started appearing in some places. Then COVID hit. That was the end of that, and now it's up and a thing. And this is like if I can do this in front of 10,000 people, I'll be happy. And again, and it's sort of at the same time, I'm doing something for the legacy of both of my grandparents by doing this. So that's that would thrill me.
That's awesome.
And
So if you're out
I
there
would like
and you know how to get him,
I would like my children to be proud of me.
oh, I'm sure they are
I
already.
don't know if they are, but that would be cool.
I'm sure they are.
Yeah.
This
Okay.
has been a delight for me. Thank you so much. Tell people where they can follow, where they can go to watch, support,
Okay.
anything
Well,
that
you
you
can now. Well,
with
now you
you.
can find. I went back on Facebook because I wanted to get into those Marx Brothers groups. So you can find me on Facebook. I don't do a lot of posting on regular Facebook. I just kind of do the Marx Brothers, but whatever. You can. I'm on Instagram. I'm on X or whatever you call it. But I do again very little of X. I do. Again, I used to do all my everything on Instagram. So you can find me in the usual places. And if you're doing a comedy thing, and if anybody wants to talk to me about the Mar whatever, I'm always available to step into whatever somebody likes to discuss or a podcast or whatever. This has been absolutely this is actually one of the funnest ones I have done, so this would be cool.
Thank you
And
so
so let
much.
you and I'll stay in touch. So if I get to Vegas or you get down here, or if you get to LA, if I'm here, I'll take you to lunch. Right?
Fabulous. That'd
Okay,
be
cool.
great.
Great.
I'm going to be in Orange County February 7th.
Okay, what are you doing there?
I'm on a show with Jessica Wellington, a comedy show. I'm on the lineup of comics.
Oh, you're kidding. Wait, so do you do your own do you do stand up yourself? Oh, well, I have to investigate this.
Yeah, it's all on my YouTube.
Why don't you and I should do a show? Why don't we either I'll open for you or you open for me?
I would like to open for you.
Well, I don't know. I should probably open for you, but no, I'm serious. Why don't we do that? A comedy legend like you, and then me coming from a comedy legend.
Let's do it.
Okay, but let's talk seriously. When we look at some point, let's talk about it. Let's not just say and then not discuss it.
I know how many, if I had a nickel for everybody that said something,
If you had
right?
you'd have a nickel.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
You guys,
thank you. It's totally
Andy
great. I
Mark,
loved it. Thank you. Thank
thank
you
you
so
so
much.
much.